Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony of the 2022 World Bio Summit. And once again, it's my great pleasure to introduce myself. My name is Jessica Singhee Lee, and today and tomorrow, I've given the honor of being your MC for this very special occasion. So this two-day World Bio Summit 2022 will be held both online and offline. You may join us online if you visit the World Bio Summit website. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask for your active participation and greater interest until the very end. Then now, without further ado, we would like to resume with the keynote speech session. And this time, we will have Dr. Richard Hatchett, the Chief Executive Officer of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI. So now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Hatchett onto the stage with a big round of applause.
Annyeonghaseyo. Hello. Your Excellencies, Chairman Ban Ki-moon, President Asakawa, Director General Kim, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is a distinct honor and my sincere pleasure to address you today as we open the World Bio Summit 2022 with its focus on the future of vaccines and biohealth. These are topics of the utmost importance with implications for our personal health and well-being, of course, but also for international cooperation and solidarity, and even, and I don't think it's hyperbole to say so, the future of our civilization. And we can scarcely talk about the future of vaccines without reflecting on the pandemic that we have just come through. The investments that we make in the next few years, the institutions we create, and the work we foster will determine whether the great life-saving potential of vaccines is realized for all or reserved for the few. Over the last few days, I've had the pleasure of walking around the neighborhoods of Seoul to observe people gathering in cafes and restaurants, to see elderly pensioners and young couples strolling through Namsan Park, to enjoy a city that is carefully returning to normal levels of activity and social interaction after 2 disrupted years. Some of the cost of that disruption can be quantified. The lives lost can be counted, the damage to our economies estimated, and some can be inferred. The impact of the pandemic on child development and in terms of lost education time and rates of mental illness can at least be measured, even if the subjective costs to the individuals involved remain unfathomable. But some of the cost can't be measured at all. The pandemic hit our societies like a meteor, and the shock waves continue to reverberate. As the waves of COVID-19 have subsided, our political leaders have understandably turned their attention to more immediately pressing issues. I come to Korea from a country, the United Kingdom, mired in an economic and political crisis. Global energy prices have skyrocketed. The war in Ukraine presents a grave and unresolved international security crisis. A global recession is looming, and all these factors together have contributed to seismic food insecurity and impending famine in many of the world's poorest nations. The World Food Program has called 2022 a year of unprecedented hunger and estimates that more than 10% of the world's population goes to bed hungry every night. The number of people worldwide facing acute food insecurity has increased by 250% since 2019. All of these crises, even the war in Ukraine, have roots in the pandemic. The pandemic was a massively destabilizing event. It has wrecked economies, disrupted supply chains, depleted national treasuries, eroded trust in institutions, exacerbated political divisions within societies, undermined international solidarity, and given opportunists like Vladimir Putin openings to pursue their goals in contravention of international law. When a major volcanic eruption occurs, the ejection of lava, volcanic ash, and gas reduces the pressure in the magma chamber, and thereby the risk of future eruptions, at least in the near term. Pandemics are not like that. The fact that we have just emerged from a pandemic does not reduce the risk that a pandemic could occur next year. Over the last several decades, across multiple viral families, we have observed more frequent, larger, and more geographically dispersed outbreaks. The largest ever Ebola epidemic occurred in 2013 to 2016. The second largest occurred in 2018 to 2020. And we are now struggling with a large outbreak of the closely related Sudan Ebola virus in Uganda. The largest ever monkeypox epidemic affecting over 70,000 people in more than 100 countries is ongoing. COVID represents the largest ever coronavirus epidemic. And we have had 2 pandemics since the turn of the century, caused by viruses from different families. We were fortunate that the first, caused by H1N1, influenza, was mild. Imagine if we had had 2 COVID-scale events within a decade. Or imagine if we had an event that made COVID look mild. That is not inconceivable. The other coronaviruses that have emerged in recent years, SARS and MERS, are respectively 30 and 100 times as lethal as COVID. And that is why I say that the future of civilization may depend upon our progress in developing vaccines. There is obviously much we need to do to prepare for pandemics, but having definitive medical countermeasures, and particularly vaccines, sooner will allow us to greatly reduce their impact. And if we can deliver and share vaccines fast enough, potentially even stop pandemics in their tracks. CEPI has set the ambitious target of delivering vaccines for use within 100 days of starting their development. That would represent a 70% reduction over what was achieved in 2020. Had we delivered a vaccine in 100 days from the time the viral sequences were released, vaccine would have become available in April 2020, when there were cumulatively just over 2 million cases of COVID worldwide, rather than in December, when there were almost 70 million. If you imagine a world with better viral surveillance, more widely distributed genetic sequencing capability, and stronger norms about the sharing of information, we could plausibly have initiated vaccine development a month earlier so that the 100-day goal would have been achieved when there were just 300,000 cases. With either of these scenarios, much of the trauma caused by the pandemic would have been averted. Add the earlier use of masks, aggressive social distancing measures, and travel restrictions, and the number might have been reduced by another order of magnitude, with the geographic dispersion of cases all but prevented. And if a broadly protective coronavirus vaccine had been available from day one, the pandemic might have been prevented altogether. Political support for the 100-day mission is strong. The UK and Germany, Italy and Indonesia have elevated achieving the 100-day mission as a priority in their respective G7 and G20 presidencies over the last 2 years. The updated U.S. Pandemic Preparedness Plan, published in September 2021, also commits to this goal. And Japan has given every indication that the 100-day mission will figure prominently in the 2023 G7 agenda. But developing vaccines in 100 days will matter only if the production of those vaccines can be shared and scaled rapidly so that they can be used wherever needed, which means by everyone. It has become a cliche to say that no one is safe until everyone is safe. But where pandemics with the power to multiply exponentially are concerned, this is indisputably true. And the fundamental explanation for the inequity that emerged once vaccines became available was structural. The inequity was due to the concentration of vaccine manufacturing in just a few locations: the US, Europe, India, and China. It was politically untenable for those countries not to serve the needs of their own populations first, and that reality will not change. So the complement to the 100-day mission, the thing we must also achieve if we truly want to protect the world from future epidemics and pandemics, is the expansion and more equitable distribution of manufacturing capacity worldwide. Every region in the world should be able to manufacture vaccines for its own use, and every region should have access to the rapid response platforms that will be our first line of defense. To our Korean hosts, Korea will play a leading role in this effort, for it is the best example I know of, a country committing itself to a goal of vaccine self-sufficiency, implementing an industrial policy over several years to achieve that end, and making rapid, tangible progress towards that goal. Through discipline, hard work, and commitment, it has developed a homegrown COVID-19 vaccine, SKYCoV-1. In February, with the support of WHO, Korea established a global biomanufacturing workforce training hub that has already enrolled its first class. And supporting global health is now an important part of Korea's foreign policy and development agenda. Korea, indeed, has much to teach and share with the world. And now, let me speak to each of you personally. The work you are doing is critical and central to the story of our time. You are contributing to the betterment of humanity. And who knows but that the work you are doing now may even save the world. Be diligent. Work hard. Do not be fearful. And God bless you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hatchett. Thank you for your meaningful keynote speech, for sharing your knowledge and insight on the importance of preparing pandemics through global cooperation. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we will have two more meaningful keynote speeches at this session. Please allow me to invite Dr. Jerome Kim, the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, who will be giving us our second keynote speech. So please welcome him with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. 안녕하십니까? Excellencies, Ban Ki-moon, Masatsugu Asakawa, Dr. Richard Hatchett. To the rest of the distinguished guests here and colleagues, welcome. I'm Jerome Kim, the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute, an international organization that discovers, develops, and delivers vaccines for global health. And I'll speak today on work in progress, preparing for the next pandemic. The COVID-19 crisis has definitely taught us the meaning and the implications of vaccine innovation. This is from the World Health Organization: 172 vaccines in clinical development, 199 still in preclinical development, that is in animal studies. And we've seen innovations, new mRNA vaccines. We've never had an mRNA vaccine before. A large-scale use of adenoviral vectored vaccines, the first ever approved DNA vaccines, and extensive use of new adjuvants, things that stimulate immune responses. So this kind of innovation was brought forward by a crisis, and it's a good thing. The second lesson that we might learn is that it took a fair amount of funding to do this. If you look on the panel on the left, the amount of money that different organizations put forward in order to pre-purchase vaccines, the European Union, the United States through Operation Warp Speed, invested $20 billion. CEPI, put forward, $1.5 billion. If you look on the panel on the left, you can see where those investments went. So in order to achieve innovation at scale, in order to achieve the kind of scale that we need in order to protect the world against pandemics, it requires investment. This investment not only spurs innovation, but for companies, it very importantly de-risks vaccine development. So we take companies that have to deal with 90% failure rates, and we give them an opportunity through funding to show that innovation can progress rapidly. And this is going to be a key part of CEPI's 100-day goal. If we remember lesson number 3, where we were in the middle of 2021, we were worried that vaccine was not getting out quickly enough. But what we found is by the end of 2021, we were already in a situation where countries were offering IVI vaccine if we could distribute it. It was not manufacturing. It was the distribution of the vaccine, the use of the vaccine. So now we know that we can scale to 12 billion doses of vaccine in 12 months, a really remarkable number. But the more important thing is going to be using that vaccine. The challenge here is that equity is a bigger problem than supply. So this is from our World in Data. The greener the country is, the more likely that the population has received at least a single dose of vaccine. So you can see areas of the world which are very green, but you can also see areas of the world which are not green. And that is the problem with equity. 12.86 billion doses have been given. 2/3 of the world has received at least a single dose, but in low-income countries, 77% of people are unvaccinated, have not seen a single dose. So lesson number 4 is that access and equity are still a major problem. And when you think of the consequences, the World of Meters tells us 6.5 million deaths, over 600 million cases of COVID. The WHO estimate is an actually even greater toll, nearly 15 million deaths, and IHME, which was funded by the Gates Foundation, estimates 18 million deaths. So we're dealing here with a significant toll of the failure of equity. We had a great idea, a great solution, a brilliant solution, COVAX, 190 countries organized by CEPI, Gavi, WHO. Low and middle income countries were going to get the vaccine at low or no cost. 2 billion doses were going to be distributed in 2021. Now, we in fact fell short of that total. But this does not mean that COVAX should be discarded. It means that COVAX needs to be improved. Why? Because equity is still a problem. The failure of equity and access had 3 terrible consequences: a humanitarian consequence, more deaths; an economic consequence, greater economic impact. And if you look at some of the total cost estimates for the pandemic, it isn't $5 trillion, it isn't $20 trillion, it's the entire annual GDP of the world, $130 trillion. This counts not only the direct cost of the pandemic, but the impact on education of children, the impact of governments investing trillions of dollars to support economies. So when we think about the pandemic, let's not only think about the number of lives lost, which is tragic, the economic cost, which is also tragic, but the broader cost to society, which is enormous. Lesson number 5, and this is something my professor taught us: vaccines don't save lives, vaccination saves lives. So in order to give those 16 billion doses, we need personnel, we need logistics, we need tracking and recording, we need access. People need to have time off from work where they're making $1 a day. And how are they going to do that, and how are they going to choose? We need to strengthen health systems around the world in order to give all those doses. So this is what the Tony Blair Institute calls absorption capacity. And we are challenged when it comes to absorption capacity. So lesson number 5 is that impact is about delivery. Again, emphasizing this idea, if you look at a high-income country, and those are shown in pink, they didn't have to devote much of their health budget in order to vaccinate 40% of their population. If you look at low-income countries, you're looking at, and those are the black dots, up to 25% of the entire budget of the health ministry was being used to vaccinate 40% of the population. Those are the demands we're putting on healthcare systems. Those are things that need to be strengthened. Lesson number 6, And this is, I'm an old Army guy, so when we talk about layered defense, we talk about the first line of defense being masks, distance, hygiene, and diagnostics. The second line of defense for those viruses that break through are vaccines. Now, we know that vaccines don't protect that well against infection, they protect against disease. So when a person gets infected, we need access to the therapeutics, not only in high-income countries, but all over the world, to reduce the burden of illness and death. So lesson number 6, COVID prevention is about more than vaccines. Lesson number 7 was mentioned previously. We're increasingly thinking that the world needs to make vaccines regionally. But in order to do that, we need to think end to end that this manufacturing capacity has to be sustainable. We don't necessarily need 193 separate manufacturing facilities. We need to think sustainably so that when the next pandemic strikes, the vaccine that is needed can be manufactured where it's needed. Vaccine security is about global security. And finally, the last lesson is preparation. We can't be prepared for the past pandemic. We need to be prepared for the future pandemic, which means that we need to be able to collect, look at, and analyze data and make decisions appropriately. And this requires preparation. Preparation is one of the most difficult things to do, and preparation in advance of need is the most difficult thing to do. So now we have to think of equity for the future pandemics. And in order to do that, we have to mitigate the 5 inequities. There was a tremendous inequity in diagnostics, so that in many parts of the world, they couldn't make a diagnosis of COVID. If you didn't make a diagnosis of COVID, you didn't know that someone died of COVID. There was no need to be worried about COVID. Diagnostics are key. Research and development funding also needed to be distributed more equitably so that countries and potentially companies that are located regionally had the ability to work on vaccines for global health. Manufacturing, we spoke about already, and Dr. Hatchett has already talked about the need for development and the current movement towards regional manufacturing. We need vaccine supply equity. And this means that enough people need to be vaccinated early on when we had those vaccines, and we were using them exclusively in high-income countries to vaccinate people at risk, the elderly, healthcare workers in low and middle income countries, and that was critical. And finally, vaccination equity, and we're still not there when 77% of the world has not received, of low-income countries have not given a single dose of vaccine. We have some fixes. COVAX is a fix, but it needs to be modified. We have dispersed manufacturing, but we need to make it a success. For the others, it's still open, and we really need to think about diagnostics, R&D funding, and vaccination. For the future, then, we need to bridge the 4 gaps. The first gap, the diagnostic gap; the second gap, the manufacturing gap; the third gap, the equity gap. And each of these has a consequence. If you have a diagnostics gap, you have no deaths from the disease, no fear, so no vaccine uptake and no impact. If you have a manufacturing gap, vaccines aren't getting out, so there's no vaccination and no impact. And when you think about the equity gap, this means that we don't have vaccines where we need it, when we need it, no vaccination, no impact. The consequence, more deaths, more cost, and more viral mutants. Why? Because outbreaks generate mutants, and mutants generate outbreaks. And so unless we can break that cycle, we're going to be stuck. And the 4th gap, then, is a leadership gap. A global pandemic does not need a self-directed string quartet. It needs a symphony orchestra with a conductor. And who is that global leader? Who is going to step forward and say, this is what we need to do? This is the end-to-end thinking that is necessary. We're not only thinking about diagnostics or only thinking about manufacturing, but we're thinking about the distribution and implementation of vaccination programs to have maximal impact on life. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jerome Kim, for sharing the lessons learned from the previous COVID-19 pandemic. And I also do agree, and I believe a greater leadership is required to overcome greater crisis. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Dr. Jerome Kim a big round of applause. Next up, we will have the final keynote speech for this session. Please allow me to invite Dr. Seth Berkley, the CEO of the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, or GAVI, And today, he cannot join us in person, so he has sent us very meaningful video. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give your attention to the screen with a big round of applause.
Your Excellency, Dr. Cho Koo-hong, Minister of Health and Welfare, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor and pleasure to participate in the first World Bio Summit. And I'd like to congratulate the government of Korea's strong leadership in global health for launching and hosting this summit. Never before has the future of vaccines been so critical to world health. Because while this pandemic may have been a wake-up call in terms of the global health security threat posed by infectious disease, the truth is it is just a taste of things to come. Even as COVID-19 continues to spread, research suggests that the probability of us experience another pandemic with the same kind of impact is increasing by 2% each year due to increased population size and the impact of climate change. Vaccines, of course, are by far our best defense. With COVID, the bad news is that even as life appears to be returning to normal in many places, it is clear that the pandemic is still not over. So far, there have been more cases of COVID in 2022 than the previous 2 years combined. But thanks to the power of vaccines, there have been many fewer deaths. Even so, there have now been over 620 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally, and likely well more than 15 million deaths. It's now well established that COVID-19 has widened the global health equity gaps that existed even before the pandemic, pushing the Sustainable Development Goals wildly off track. It will take unprecedented financing, political support, and prioritization to get back on track. The positive news, however, is that we've got the vaccines we need to fight this virus and the global collaboration to get them out to people through the creation of the COVAX facility. As the vaccine pillar of the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, or ACT-A, COVAX is co-led by CEPI, UNICEF, WHO, and my organization, Gavi, which also serves as COVAX's secretariat. And DELIVER is what COVAX has done, with 1.8 billion doses delivered to 146 economies so far. Of these, more than 1.6 billion, roughly 90%, have gone to people in lower income countries that would have otherwise struggled to get access. This initiative, the largest and most complex global deployment of vaccines ever, has made it possible to reduce the vaccine equity gap by helping lower income countries protect 51% of their citizens with a complete primary series compared to a global average of around 62%. In doing so, COVAX has helped those 92 supported countries protect 76% of their healthcare workers, more than in high-income countries, although we must, of course, aim for 100%. With older people, coverage is less encouraging at only 64%, and that's important because they obviously are people at the highest risk. Korea has been with us from the beginning of this journey and has played a critical role in our efforts to ensure equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines globally. Korea is one of the leading financial donors to COVAX and is hosting the manufacturer that supplied AstraZeneca vaccines at the early stage of the pandemic when supply was scarce, in particular for lower income countries. They also host many other important manufacturers for Gavi. For this, I thank you for your commitment and ongoing support of Gavi and COVAX and their missions to make vaccines more equitable in lower income countries. Now, as we look to the future, it'll be important to draw on the key learnings during this pandemic and build on the successes, the global solidarity, collaboration, and innovation we have seen if we are to be prepared for future pandemics. Because as should now be clear, part of our duty is to protect future generations to ensure we have a global health architecture that is more resilient to and better able to respond to future pandemics. As I've already mentioned, the risk of pandemics is increasing. Similarly, every year now, climate change, migration, conflict, and food insecurity continue to leave hundreds of millions of people more displaced, vulnerable, and at risk. The implications of all of this for public health are dire, which is why it is important now not only to reverse the backslides caused by this pandemic, but also to gain ground as quickly as possible. And one way, and perhaps the best way, is to prioritize vaccine equity. During a pandemic, that first means ensuring global vaccine supply security by diversifying and expanding vaccine manufacturing in emerging and low-income countries, particularly in Africa. It also means having mechanisms in place to assure equitable access to pandemic vaccines, and while at the same time maintaining critical routine immunization. Contingency financing and surge capacity are also both critical to ensure that agencies can rapidly pivot to mount a global response when needed. In terms of improving future pandemic preparedness and response, one of the best ways to achieve this is to create stronger health systems and more resilient primary health care through universal access to routine immunization. Protecting the most vulnerable children and families in the world from infectious disease and ensuring no one is left behind makes this possible by creating a platform upon which other critical interventions can be built, and arguably where it counts the most. This helps improve pandemic preparedness because usually the first point of contact people have with the health system when they get sick is with primary health care. So while it remains imperative that we continue to work towards achieving equity with COVID-19 vaccines, we also urgently need to restore and expand routine immunization. That does not mean it should be our only focus. There is also an urgent need for investment in the healthcare workforce in many of the worst affected countries, without which immunization programs cannot operate. Not to mention disease surveillance, strengthened labs, and many other areas that need political support and funding. But with an increasing, challenging global health landscape, strengthening routine immunization offers the fastest and most effective way to simultaneously make up lost ground and have the biggest impact in terms of current pandemic preparedness and future pandemic preparedness by making sure that no one is left behind. I thank you again for this opportunity to speak, and I'm sorry I can't be here in person with you, and I look forward to working closely with all of you. Thank you.
Dr. Berkeley, thank you very much for this final keynote speech. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to have a photo shoot with our speakers and distinguished guests. So please come up to the stage to join this photo session. Now, we would like to have our distinguished guests and speakers to take a photo together in order to commemorate this meaningful occasion, the 2022 World Bio Summit. Please come forward. And ladies and gentlemen, those who are on the stage, please gather in the center of the stage. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Since we have many distinguished guests and renowned speakers from home and abroad, we would like to have a photo shoot with all of our distinguished guests. So now we're having them onto the stage. And ladies and gentlemen, we look forward for your patience. And those who are on the stage, please gather in the center of the And we would like to have our moderator and our panelists please come up to the stage and please take your seats. Thank you. 네, 여러분 잠시 후 기업 대표 세션 시작하겠습니다. 모두 착석을 부탁드리겠습니다. May I have your attention, please? We will soon begin the CEO session shortly, so please take your seats. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome back to the 2022 World Bio Summit. Now we will resume with the CEO session. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for joining here today, both online and offline. And before we begin this session, I'd like to give some housekeeping announcements. And during the session, we'd like to provide a simultaneous interpretation service. For those who need any translation service, please use your receivers on your tables. Channel 1 for English, and Channel 2 is for Korean. Thank you. And for those attending this event online are also advised to set the interpretation language as either Korean and English. Thank you. And during this session, we will share each company's experiences in overcoming COVID-19 and discuss macro strategies to cope with future pandemics under the theme of Future Strategy for Post-Pandemic Era. So as you can see on the stage, we are joined by 9 CEOs for sharing their knowledge and experiences. And this session will be chaired by Dr. Jerome Kim, the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. And ladies and gentlemen, now please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists with a big round of applause. Dr. Jerome Kim, the floor now is yours.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm going to introduce each person as they're about to speak. And in order to save time, to give them time to do their presentations and then to give us time to have a facilitated discussion, I'll keep the introductions fairly short. The first speaker is Janine Small, the Global President of Pfizer International Developed Markets.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everyone. And I really am honoured and delighted to participate in this World Bio Summit today. It's the introductory and the keynote speeches have really been enlightening, and it's a pleasure to be here. But first of all, I really would like to recognise the Korean government's efforts to manage the pandemic. I'm well aware that Korea is one of the countries that has been successfully controlling the pandemic situation with a strategic COVID-19 response called K-Quarantine. And Korea really has been an example of strong, proactive policy decision-making, which has helped mitigate the local impact of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, as you can see on the slide here, that as government and policy leaders, you know the global public health and societal cost of the COVID-19 pandemic has been broad-ranging and will no doubt reverberate into the long term. And to date, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to more than 221 million cases. I think you said a little bit more than that on your slide, and about 6.5 million deaths globally. And beyond the direct effects of COVID-19, we've also seen a range of negative health effects as well. We've seen increases in anxiety and depression, delays in receiving routine medical care, and even reductions in life expectancy, amongst others. And from an economic perspective, we know that greater than 90% of the global economy experienced a market contraction in per capita GDP. And the IMF has estimated global economic losses to be 13.8 trillion through to 2024. And so the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is really a stark reminder of the importance of building more resilient health systems that are better prepared for a wide variety of public health threats. So as we shift away from emergency response to COVID-19, the risk for another pandemic, as we are hearing, still remains. We know that COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic threat we face, and we must act with the same diligence in addressing the next pandemic as we have been in fighting this one. Pandemic preparedness is evolving at the global level, and as many countries begin to plan for a world where COVID-19 is a manageable endemic, it is crucial to consider how the global crisis has changed healthcare and the learnings we must act on to strengthen healthcare systems. But as we've also been hearing this morning, the pandemic preparedness is really complex, and it requires bold leadership, as we heard, sustained investment and risk-taking in R&D, sustainable health systems, open trade policies, strong manufacturing and supply chain infrastructure, and collaboration at all levels. Improving pandemic preparedness is a global endeavor that requires sustained collaboration between the biopharmaceutical industry, governments, NGOs, multilateral organizations, and others. And as I said, Korea has been an example of strong, proactive policy decision-making, which has helped to lessen the local impact of COVID-19 under the open door policy. As you can see on the slide, the vaccination status has been 87.9% for the first dose, 87.1% for the second dose, the third dose 65.5%, and the fourth dose is already 14.7% as of October the 24th. And the targeted quarantine really focused on high-risk groups with aggressive testing and isolation for the infected, which leads to the lowest level of fatality rates among OECD countries. It's also the third fastest country in the world to introduce Paxlovid and ranked 6 out of the 78 countries in the Agility Index, which evaluated the nation's ability to be adaptable, dynamic, modern, progressive, or responsive to pandemic. And based on this successful experience of combating COVID-19, it is time now for us all, as we've been hearing and why we're here today, to be ready for the next pandemic. So we are talking about what we're learning from these pandemic experiences. And as you can see, it is about speed, it's about collaboration, and it's about equity. So the speed, it really enabled Pfizer to make the impossible possible and to find new ways of accelerating our progress because of our purpose-driven approach. And we were able to do something, as you've heard, that normally takes 10 years and deliver the world a safe and highly effective vaccine. And we applied the same forward thinking and urgency to develop and deliver a potentially safe and effective oral treatment. In the collaboration space, the private sector really does play a key role in the health crisis, and continued support from partners is also critical. And this pandemic has really, really taught us that. And from an equity point of view, as we've heard again through the keynote speeches, that the COVID-19 pandemic has really laid bare the health inequalities that exist between wealthy nations and vulnerable communities in lower income countries to ensure equitable access to vaccines and treatments. But I would just like to remind everybody that by September of this year, Pfizer has delivered more than 3.8 billion doses of our COVID-19 vaccine to almost every corner of the world and pledged more than 2 billion doses of our vaccines to low and middle income countries. And we've also signed a voluntary license agreement with the Medicines Patent Pool to enable Paxlovid so them can develop and distribute the generic versions of that for low and middle income countries. And we've also announced in terms of equity, which you may also have heard of, the Accord for Healthier World, which supports Paxlovid and 22 other medicines and vaccines at a not-for-profit basis for 45 lower income countries. So as I'm sure we're going to be discussing, pandemic preparedness really is complex. And it does require a lot of collaboration, a lot of technologies like vaccines and medicines around the world, and requires partnership in industry. But I'm sure we'll get into that more when we get into the Q&A and the panel discussion. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Janine. And so the next speaker is Dr. Paul Burton, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Moderna, who will present through video link, and then the questions will be taken by Patrick Bergstedt, who's the Senior Vice President at Moderna. Paul? Paul, could you please unmute?
Thank you, Dr. Kim and the organizers, for the chance to be here. I want to take a slightly different approach and think about technology, how it has helped us during the current COVID pandemic and where it might take us in the future, and that's the power of messenger RNA. Moderna is a young company. We have been in existence for just about a decade. We, of course, spent that time doing deep research into messenger RNA, optimizing codons, developing a lipid nanoparticle that is biodegradable, that allows high concentrations of messenger RNA to be administered. And that came into great value in the pandemic because we were then able to administer high doses of our vaccine, which generated very high antibody levels, really driving a great response in terms of hospitalization reduction, prevention of disease, prevention of severe disease. We have now obviously administered hundreds of millions of doses of this vaccine, hundreds of millions of other doses, of course, given around the world. And we have 46 different development programs focusing in infectious disease today, but also in many other areas. I think a remarkable feature of the pandemic that came to light was the speed with which organizations can come together, share information, collaborate for the common good. Within 2 days, we were able to go from the original sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus to antigen design. Of course, it then took some additional time to actually develop the vaccine and test it very thoroughly, but we were able to move so quickly, and that is because we collaborated with governments, with academic groups, with non-government organizations around the world. Today, we believe that messenger RNA is able to be brought to bear not only on COVID, but on other important respiratory diseases and other viral infections, bacterial infections, and of course then even beyond this into cancer, cardiovascular disease, so many other areas. Again, a way to bring health equity to people around the world, not only in pandemics and infectious diseases, but in other disease areas as well. There continues to be a significant unmet medical need. Respiratory viruses kill hundreds of thousands of people. We've heard today, of course, about the toll that the SARS-CoV-2 virus has taken, that we know too well. But flu, respiratory syncytial virus, so many other pathogens kill people young and old today. And those deaths and hospitalizations are preventable. Latent viruses, of course, also another huge area of burden, not only in terms of the damage that they cause to newborns, for example, cytomegalovirus, the leading cause of birth defects in newborns, but also in terms of cancer and perhaps even other chronic diseases such as multiple sclerosis. And we have also, in doing our part in other global health pandemics, we've announced our commitment to the 15 priority pathogens. We have activity there, and of course we're trying to open other centers around the world. We've recently talked about our activity in the Republic of Kenya, where we'll invest up to $500 million for a new center there to generate vaccines in Africa, for Africa, by Africa. This image predicted for SARS-CoV-2, not the reality from today on, but just look at the mirage of different variants that we have had to experience and work through just in the last 12 to 24 months. Variant after variant coming into every country in the world. Again, wreaking havoc, increasing hospitalization, killing people, often unnecessarily. We have excellent vaccines available today, and I think a large part of our work has to be continuing to increase vaccine confidence, not to let our guard down now at this critical point in the pandemic. We have the tools available, and as we go into a winter in the Northern Hemisphere and out of a winter in the Southern Hemisphere with severe flu cases, we have to continue to collaborate and work together. And of course, SARS-CoV-2 is not the only pathogen that we will face. What does the future pandemic landscape look like for us? Cholera outbreaks, outbreaks of other diseases, monkeypox, These will be part of our future, I think. And again, we have to work together to share data and to have tools and platforms that can pivot quickly and generate vaccines to meet this ever-increasing pandemic landscape. So in summary, our Moderna platform technology has taken over a decade to develop. It now has the opportunity to provide an innovative approach to medicines and vaccines, and we're proud and humbled by the role that we were able to play in keeping people safe during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. We were able to respond to that virus, hundreds of millions of doses of Spikevax, clearly hundreds of millions of doses of other vaccines as well were thankfully distributed throughout the world, preventing millions of hospitalizations and deaths as well. The future of pandemic preparedness is complex. It will continue to require collaboration, data sharing transparently, and the ability to pivot rapidly to identify key pathogens, to develop vaccines against them, and then to distribute those vaccines in a rapid, a seamless and equitable way around the world. So thank you all again for your attention. It's an honor to be here today.
Thank you, Paul. The next speaker is Jae-Yong Ahn, who is the CEO of SK Bioscience. Jung?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Jae-Yong Ahn from SK Bioscience. I'm very honored to have a chance to present SK Bioscience's next journey for a deeper global collaboration. This is SK Bioscience at a glance. Our R&D center began only 12 years ago, and our manufacturing facility began only 8 years ago. Both soon became state-of-art facility, thanks to our fantastic team and partner. Their hard work led SK Bioscience viable growth and also resulting in having fantastic product pipeline, as you can see on the center. When the pandemic hit last 3 years ago, SK Bioscience immediately planned a plan to prevent people from pandemic. Track 1, SK Bioscience developed its own COVID-19 vaccine with a very close collaboration with global and domestic partner. So last June, SkyCoV-1, which is our brand name, got the approval from Korean MFDS. Track 2 is manufacturing leading vaccines at the time. SK Bioscience successfully completed a very close collaboration with AstraZeneca, and also collaboration with Novavax still continues. I really like these slides. Without any partnership, I strongly believe that there is no COVID-19 vaccine. These slides clearly demonstrate how important global partnership is. I'd like to take this opportunity to appreciate to all of our partners for close collaboration based on trust. Through the experience during the COVID-19 situation, SK Bioscience recently established its own growth plan, so-called SKBS 3.0. I don't want to touch every single components, which is composed of 5 what's and 5 how's. I'd like to mention 2 areas. First one is next pandemic preparation, and the other one is global partnership. The threat of next pandemic is real. I'm noticing that a lot of ambitious approach is going on, like CEPI's 100 days mission, the Gates Foundation's 6 months distribution target, Korean government's global vaccine hub. I believe, I'm strongly committed. SK Bioscience is going to take part by aiming to be a global leading vaccine provider. In order to do that, I think stronger partnership is very, very essential, as well as the specific plans are required, such as innovative platform technology securing, expanded infrastructure in R&D and manufacturing, a strategic clinical and regulatory pathway. With this, SK Bioscience is aiming to develop next pandemic vaccine within 100 days from outbreak, from existing 2 years performance during the last COVID-19 situation. Like I said, securing innovative technology is very important. mRNA technology provides a lot of benefit. I'm proudly say that this morning, CEPI and SK Bioscience made a contract for us to set up next generation mRNA vaccine platform technology. This is very meaningful in many ways, especially prepare the next pandemic efficiently and effectively. I believe this kind of mRNA vaccine technology is very essential. We have many kinds of global partnership, but I'd like to recognize the great efforts by Korean government's efforts, if you see in the left-hand side. And also I'd like to recognize WHO's great efforts, if you see the right-hand side. I'd like to close my presentation by sharing our mission and vision with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeong. The next speaker is Jan van Akker, the President of Emerging Markets for Merck MSD.
Thank you very much, Jerome. I would like to thank the Ministry of Health and Welfare of Korea, of the government of Korea, and the WHO for organizing this World Bio Summit. This is a very important topic today, the pandemic and vaccine and biohealth preparedness. And I'm trying to advance the slides, but somehow I'm unable to make it work. Let me just talk for a few seconds about the lessons that we've learned from this pandemic. MSD is a company that's focused on making a difference for patients through breakthrough innovation. And if you think about the best way to help patients, it's actually to prevent disease through vaccination. We have a very long legacy as a company in discovering and developing vaccines. It starts with smallpox vaccines at the end of the 19th century and goes through many, many, many innovations and discoveries last century into this century, the first vaccine that prevents cancer, cervical cancer, and the first vaccine for Ebola. So we're very proud as a company to have been discovering so many vaccines, but of course, if you want to make a difference for people, it's not only about discovery. As one of the previous speakers said, it's about vaccinating people, and to do that, you need the manufacturing capacity. So as a company, last year, we've manufactured about 200 million doses, and we are actually significantly expanding our manufacturing capacity by investing more than $20 billion to triple our manufacturing capacity. Now, if you look at those numbers, and you think about the pandemic and the world's population, it's clear that there are not enough doses that a company can manufacture on its own. So most importantly is collaboration. And when we talk about the pandemic, as a company, we've actually started working on addressing both vaccines as well as therapeutics early on. We did that in collaboration with many, many different partners, starting with, on the speed side, collaboration with regulatory authorities around the world. And I'd like to compliment the government of Korea, not only for its amazing handling of the pandemic, but also on the regulatory side for the development of a new fast regulatory pathway in the case of the pandemic. You need partnerships in a situation like the pandemic and addressing other healthcare issues as well. And so what you can see is that as a company, we've had many different partnerships. We actually took a lot of risk as a biopharmaceutical company. We worked on 4 programs, 2 vaccines and 2 therapeutics for the pandemic. And of those 4, only 1 was successful. We had, though, from the day that we started working on clinical programs for the antiviral, we have started thinking about broad access through voluntary licensing. And this is unique. It's the first of its kind in the pharmaceutical industry, that before the first regulatory approval, we had already signed collaborations with multiple generic companies and with the medicines patent pool. So as a company and an industry and all players in healthcare, what have we learned over these last 2.5 years? It's all about collaboration. It starts with disease surveillance, epidemiological data sharing to ensure that labs across the world, whether they are in universities, whether they're in small biotech companies or in large biopharmaceutical companies, can actually drive that innovation and discover the vaccines or the therapeutics that will address the disease. It's working with the regulatory authorities to make sure that you get fast approvals. And by the way, it's also working between regulatory authorities to ensure that there are pathways to recognize one another's approvals. And finally, it's close collaboration between all the manufacturers and the governments to ensure that there is sufficient supply to cover all of the patients and people that need it. We, as a company, MSD, we believe that the Korean government and Korea as a country can play a unique role as a bridge between Asia and the developed world, and between the developed world and the low-income and lower middle-income countries, because of its universities, because of its highly educated workforce, and because of the way that the Ministry of Health has shown leadership by partnering with many different players to address this dreadful pandemic. So we're looking forward to collaborate with everyone in this room and with all of the distinguished speakers to prepare ourselves for what the future may hold in terms of pandemic and diseases that we need to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. The next speaker is Isao Teshirogi, the CEO of Shionogi.
Hi. Thank you for this opportunity. And first of all, I really would like to congratulate on the World Bio Summit 2022. Strong leadership by the Korean government. With the somewhat different angles, I would like to talk a little bit about what we're going to do for next pandemic in Asian countries. As you know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, COVID-19 vaccine and therapeutic development in the US advanced at unprecedented speed, far more rapidly than world have been expected based on the conventional common sense. We know that there are 2 key factors in achieving that success. First, aggressive and rapid investment in promising vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics under the umbrella of Operation Warp Speed. And vaccine development in particular was a focus on this Warp Speed support. The second key factor was the establishment of the US national system expressly to prepare for emergencies such as pandemics, conducting these preparatory activities even in normal times. Given experience that shows the value of such a preparatory system in Asia, we now need to create such a platform for collaboration amongst all stakeholders, including governments, academia, regulatory agencies, and pharmaceutical industry, and which, in Asian cases, probably not one country, but also need to be cross-border collaboration. looking at Japan's delay, I should admit, in vaccine development compared to the US, I think we can notice both problems specifically revealed by the unusual situation of the pandemic and pre-existing hurdles created by the conventional approach in the system. Neither pharmaceutical companies nor governments had an appropriate pandemic preparation system, in part because we did not have recent experience of pandemic. Even though viruses such as SARS and MERS initially appeared to be potential pandemic threats, didn't come. So, however, with the present recognition of the importance of this issue in terms of the national security, various activities are now in progress in Japan, some modeled on the US aggressive actions during this pandemic. The slide shows the action initiated to overcome the gaps disclosed during the pandemic in Japan with respect to the creation of the new emergency ready system, a new method for demonstrating the clinical performance of COVID-19 vaccines was established through discussion amongst the ICMRA, it's a regulatory agency group, members led by MHLW. That method has supported by the acceleration of the development purely domestic vaccines by Japanese companies, including Shionogi, were developing the protein-based vaccine. In addition, the creation of the emergency approval system established the new pharmaceutical regulatory pathway for the rapid approval of promising medical products during the pandemic, prior to a full or normal approval package becoming available. Furthermore, we have already initiated the collaboration between government, academia, and pharmaceutical industry in Japan, as you can see in the right-hand side, targeting for the CEPI's 100 days mission. I think this is one of the most important slides I would like to emphasize. In the United States, in addition to the existence and rapid augmentation of the organizations and structures of pandemic preparation, accelerate decision-making to protect the country based on the real-time assessment of risks and benefits will be a lasting positive outcome. The experience shows, however, that rapid decisions made in urgent conditions need to be reconsidered and potentially revised as the situation changes. For example, the EUAs for some antibody drugs which demonstrate efficacy against COVID-19 up to the Delta stages of the epidemic were revoked when efficacy against the Omicron variant could not be shown well. Under an emergency, the EUA is an essential system which is able to rapidly provide access to medical products which may help in addressing the current situation based on certain criteria, but continual vigilance and reassessment of the current environment is necessary. A flexible and responsive system able to take needed actions, positive and negative, based on the real-time assessment of the risk and benefit is also required to protect the Asian region, including Japan. So this is my last slide. The next pandemic will come. We can't avoid that. Therefore, we need to establish support networks and partnerships throughout Asia to sustain research and development, as well as a stable production and supply new medical products such as therapeutics and vaccines, sometimes the diagnostics, needed for an effective response to infectious disease, including pandemic. Specifically, we need to build a system that supports academia and companies in sustaining continual research and development, including clinical trial creation system. And I can call here the Asian panel that is able to quickly conduct large-scale clinical trials when the next pandemic occurs in Asia. I think this is a vital system, and I look forward to having the discussion with the panel and this floors today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Asao. The next speaker is Yoon Ung-soo, the Vice Chairman and CEO of Ildong Pharmaceutical.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Yoon, and I thank the organizers for allowing me to briefly present who Ildong is and our innovative R&D strategy and our commitment to address infectious disease. Ildong is an iconic 81-year-old Korean pharmaceutical company with the corporate mission or vision of to dedicate ourselves to people's happier life and better health. Last year, we achieved $519 million in revenue with a healthy double-digit growth expected for this year. As you can see in the graph, despite the COVID-19 impact on the global economy, Iltong has set on a bold course to significantly increase our R&D investment up to 19% of our sales in the past few years. This is well aligned with our strategy to become a global, innovative, R&D-driven pharmaceutical company. R&D innovation at Iltong. As mentioned, about 5 years ago, Iltong entered a new chapter in its history by launching its transformative R&D initiative to commit investment and resources, as well as establish an R&D ecosystem across the Iltong group of affiliated companies. For example, Ideance is a biotech startup. Hold on a sec, someone touched my... Ideance is a biotech startup that focuses on oncology clinical development, and Ames Bioscience provides expertise in clinical pharmacology, and iLead BMS specializes in early drug discovery. Iltong's strategy commitments to R&D has resulted in over 25 solid pipelines assets, primarily small molecules, given our strengths in medicinal chemistry. They cover a broad set of therapeutic areas and diseases, including oncology, diabetes, liver disease, and infectious disease, among others. Currently, our lead programs are progressing well through global phase 1 and 2 clinical trials in US and Europe, while we also have a couple of close to market in licensed co-developed assets, including Zocoba, which I will talk about a little bit more in detail in the next slide. Zocoba. Today, I'm especially privileged to share this CEO session platform with my dear colleague, Dr. Isao Teshiroki from Shionogi. Shionogi and Iltong have worked on the co-development of Zocoba, the oral antiviral treatments for COVID-19 discovered by Shionogi, starting just over a year ago. The two companies have closely collaborated to swiftly move Zocoba through multi-center phase 2 and 3 clinical trials across Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. With a successful release of phase 3 top-line results last month, Shionogi and Iltong are anticipating to receive EUA regulatory approvals from the Japanese and Korean authorities, respectively. Let me summarize some unique points about Zocoba partnership with Shionogi. First, Zocoba is the first COVID-19 specific molecule with demonstrated clinical efficacy involving Korean patients. Second, Shionogi has provided Iltong with the opportunity to secure local production through tech transfer of an effective or COVID-19 drug for Korea. For me personally, this was an important factor given that we need to responsibly prepare for the next viral outbreaks in Korea, considering the worst case scenarios. Next two pages shows another R&D program related to the infectious disease from Iltong, but due to the time constraints, let me skip the explanation. The last slide. This slide is a summary of Iltong's commitment for infectious disease, because I'd like to conclude by re-emphasizing Iltong's commitment and active R&D commercial projects in infectious disease. It has been a difficult couple of years due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is not over as reports of new strains continue. However, interestingly, this experience has compelled us all to step up and collaborate in order to develop much-needed drugs, diagnostic kits, vaccines, etc., for patients all over the world. I guess this is why we are all here today, to make a difference together. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that very interesting presentation. Next is Mita Gulyani, the Head of Strategy and Business Development and Sustainability, Merck Life Science.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It is my honor to be here at the Bio Summit, and thank you to the Republic of Korea and the WHO for creating this wonderful forum. I'm going to cover three things actually: how we participated in the pandemic, two, what did we learn from it, and what have we done about it, and three, what are some of the recommendations going forward, and also how Korea can play a role in this. So let me start with Merck Life Science. We're a global company that supplies critical raw materials, reagents, consumables, equipment, services to almost all leading biopharma, biotech companies in the world, as well as academic and research institutions. Actually, we have 300,000 products, and these products are used in almost every stage of biomanufacturing and clinical development. And we serve our customers through a network of 55 manufacturing sites and over 100 distribution centers. We have a deep commitment to the science and technology ecosystem in Korea, and across our three businesses that include healthcare, electronics, and life science, we have about 1,500 employees in Korea, and we operate out of 11 sites. Now, we participated quite deeply in the pandemic, and actually our products were used in over 35 diagnostic tests, 50 treatments, and 80 vaccines. And let me bring them to life a little bit. The rapid antigen test that many of you have used, that membrane on it, the lateral flow membrane, is what we manufacture. For example, our filters are used in purification of the drug product so that the vaccine you got is safe and effective. And finally, for mRNA that we've talked a lot about, we provided the lipids that encapsulate the mRNA and deliver it throughout the body for example, the Pfizer-BioNTech program. And it is no surprise that we experienced a massive surge demand for these products during the pandemic, and correspondingly, we rapidly expanded capacity. But we have to admit that while the results have been quite impressive that we delivered as an ecosystem, including producing over 11 billion drugs in a year, there were many, many challenges. And I would say one of the most difficult challenge for us was that we had to prioritize and balance supplying to COVID-19 programs versus other life-saving therapies, for example, cancer therapies, given the very stretched capacities that we had. So what did we do from it? Our response is the following. We are really focusing on creating a robust and resilient supply network, which is global and regional. And let me walk you through the three things that we did. The first is we have shifted from being a global network, which means that we would manufacture a product in a global center of excellence, to now regional networks that are in the US, America, and APAC. Second, we are maximizing capacity in our current plants, but also building more capabilities such that our distributed plants can do many more steps of the value chain. And third, we are creating capacity by pulling forward our investments. Now, this is spare capacity, but it's not idle capacity. What we mean by that is that we are putting in place infrastructure, for example, clean rooms, buildings, etc. But we will pull in the resources if we experience surge demand such that instead of taking 2 years to ramp up capacity, we can do it in a few months. So that's an example of a regional distributed network that we are setting up with available infrastructure to rapidly ramp up capacity. Now, we, as many of my colleagues have said, believe that Korea can play a very critical role in preparing for the next pandemic, building off its existing strengths. For example, the political stability, the very vibrant market, including the largest bioreactor capacity in Asia, and of course, the emerging role as an international leader, much of which has been discussed today. And we also believe that Korea can do much to supercharge the innovation ecosystem, including investing in workforce and talent development, and also truly being a champion at the global stage of open trade and innovation, such that goods, raw materials, innovation can flow freely across borders. And with that, I want to actually close with 3 messages. 1, we believe that Korea can play a unique leadership role in the future of biotech, and including vaccines. Secondly, we are deeply committed to really now being part of the innovation ecosystem in APAC and Korea, and we are going to invest deeply in that. And third, we will actually actively push, working with our multilateral partners like WHO, working with the government, working with the pharmaceutical manufacturers and other suppliers and regulatory agencies to push for open trade and innovation, such that, again, goods can flow freely, raw materials, innovation can flow freely, so that we can prepare for the next pandemic and our response is more effective, faster, and more fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mita. The next speaker is Petro Terblanche, the Managing Director of Afrigen Biologics and Vaccines.
Thank you, Jerome, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity. I'm going to give you an overview of a program which was a result of a response to the pandemic, but is also addressing 2 key issues around pandemic preparedness. First is capacity, and secondly, vaccine innovation and rapid response. I don't have to emphasize again, we know that during COVID, despite extraordinary efforts from manufacturers to supply vaccines, low and middle income countries did not receive vaccines before quite a while into the pandemic. Africa as a continent with very little vaccine manufacturing are very vulnerable. We're unable to produce our own vaccines. So the WHO, CEPI, COVAX established a program which is called the mRNA Hub program. It's a global program. The first objective is to create capacity and capability for this very future-relevant technology platform in low and middle-income countries to produce their own vaccines. And secondly, to put a great effort into capacity building, like the Biotherapeutics Training Hub here in Korea that we've heard so much about this morning. Speedy response. Since the announcement led by Dr. Tedros in June 2021, this program, 14 months later, has now expanded to a network of 15 companies in 15 countries and low and middle-income countries, and has also announced the Biotherapeutics Training Hub here in Korea. I will give some feedback on how rapid, also within 12 months, the response to developing a vaccine has occurred. What are the aims? This is establish, of course, access, focusing on key, relevant, future-specific and future-relevant technology, and to prioritize capacity building and collaboration. This is the network, Cape Town-based mRNA Hub, which is Afrigen Biologics, represented here by myself, and a network of 15 companies. Many were in this room. BioVac next to me is one of the spokes. We have Tunisia, I've seen Tunisia, Nigeria, Biopharma Indonesia, Synogium, Argentina, a large network of companies in different levels of maturity, but able to absorb the technology and to develop this network with capacity. This is a Greenfields project. The project was started with the design of a vaccine, lab scale development, scale up, and full development of technology transfer packages by ourselves and the consortium in South Africa to transfer turnkey transfer technology for mRNA vaccine production. COVID-19 vaccine is used as our first product to validate this platform, but the platform is intended to create vaccine innovation capacity for other mRNA vaccines. Just a message around technology transfer. There were many, many examples in the last 2 years of technology transfer also to Africa, but most of these are back-end, which is full finish. This program is aimed at transferring not only full finish, but full end-to-end vaccine manufacturing capacity, drug substance and drug product to the recipients in the low and middle income countries. Sustainability key for us. We are also working parallel to look at what are the most cost-effective size, economies of scale redefined, and ensuring that we build sustainable facilities with different sizes in a regionalized approach. Key to the program, of course, is capacity building. And as we were designing the vaccine, and as we were developing the process, and as we're doing the lab scale developments, and as we are doing the preclinical studies, we've also started transferring knowledge. And we've already trained 10 spokes at Afrigen in Cape Town. The process is a parallel process of knowledge transfer followed by turnkey technology development. I'm also pleased to say that we're building relationships with the IVI Institute here in Korea, and we will have them on site in Cape Town in December for integrated training, and we're also looking at collaboration on new mRNA vaccine candidates. The program sustainability is critical, so there are many platforms creating an ecosystem in which these technologies can be transferred to low and middle income countries, from regulatory support to business models to industrial policies, a network of collaborators ensuring that this program of a network of 15 companies has sustainability and can respond to future pandemic preparedness in addition to fostering and bringing socio-economic development opportunities. Parallel with the development of our primary technology platform, we've already engaged with partners on developing second-generation production technology, focusing on cost of goods, and very, very important, focusing on improved thermostability suitable for low and middle-income countries. These programs are already well underway. We've also partnered with recipients of antigens on looking at a program and a portfolio of products that can be produced on an mRNA platform. These are some of the disease targets we are reviewing with partners, knowing very, very well that for us to have a sustainable platform for mRNA, we need pipeline. We need products and a portfolio to put through these pipelines to keep these facilities operational and in preparedness state. We were particularly focusing on the burden of disease of low and middle income countries. We've known that mRNA has proved to be a successful platform for vaccine development, and we will build on the key aspects of mRNA immunization strategy to be sustainable. The last, just thank you to many, many organizations and many, many partnerships helping to build this sustainable platform for mRNA vaccination and manufacturing in low and middle income countries. Greetings from Cape Town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petro. The final speaker is Morena Makona from BioVac.
Thank you. I thought that I'll join my African partner, in standing up and making a presentation. I'd firstly like to thank the Korean government for not only inviting myself, but also to invite quite a large delegation from the African continent. I think I'm hoping that the tide is turning where Africa is just not a recipient of products and vaccines, but that we will be a meaningful partner to engage the world in terms of African manufacture and capacity building. I think, I'm not sure how many of you know, and I borrowed this slide from the Africa CDC and the Africa Union, where our heads of state have, due to the lack of vaccine manufacturing, have declared that by 2040 they would like to see 60% of vaccines that are consumed on the continent being manufactured on the continent. This is supported by a plan that is coming from the heads of state, but led by the Africa CDC. And this is something that has not only been there in thought, but also our heads of states have really spearheaded this initiative. It's something that we'd like the world to support us as a continent. And to that effect, there is a plan and a roadmap around delivering this. Detailed plans have gone through in terms of what priority diseases should be manufactured on the continent, looking at legacy technologies as well as technologies that are new, like the mRNA. So I just thought that I should just, for those that are not aware, but Africa has a plan to make sure that the sustainable vaccine manufacturing going forward. Just coming into also understanding that Africa in 2050 will be the largest population. And so we have the highest fertility rate at the moment. And so that's where the most births are going to be, and that's where the most population is going to become 2040. So I think Africa should not be ignored for many, many reasons, including this. Just for the company that I represent, we were established in 2003, and we have established key capabilities around sterile manufacture, around quality control, technology transfer that I'll take you through now, supply and distribution, cold chain handling, and we are also involved in product development, traditionally in the bacterial conjugation space. We're expanding that capability thanks to the mRNA hub that Petro spoke about just now. We are located as well in Cape Town, and this is our modest facilities in Cape Town that have just about all the capability except for drug substance GMP manufacture, but we are making plans around that. I think partnerships have been something that has come through as we listen to all of our esteemed guests here, and we are also one of those that can say that we are who we are because of the partnerships that we've had. We work with all partners from the east, from the west, north to south. Along the value chain, we have partnered with companies, as you can see, in Indonesia. We've partnered with Pfizer on not only a pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, but also on the COVID-19 vaccine. And I think we're the first in the Southern Hemisphere for that deal to be announced. And on the product development, which is quite important because R&D needs to be seen to be happening on the continent, we've been supported by the Gates Foundation. And as Petra has just described, we are also going to be involved in the mRNA hub. So this is quite important because it's not only who BioVac is, but I think it just really resonates around the need for partnerships that we coexist and we need partnerships going forward. Our involvement in the pandemic has been in three ways. One is to be participating with the mRNA hub, as we've said. In the middle is around our fill finish, our transaction with Pfizer. And in the initial stages, we were involved even in the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. So we learned very quickly to handle -70 and -20 degree products. And that came with many lessons learned, and hopefully going forward, that will help us even on the distribution side. This is my last slide, and essentially this is a slide that I use internally, but this can be, I think, used for everybody, that ultimately we need an ecosystem. For us to have capability on the African continent, we need modest facilities, we need processes, we need the right people. You've heard about the training hub, one of which will be based here. We need partnerships, as we've outlined, and ultimately we need a regulatory environment that will support us. I'm also very pleased to say that many African countries are upping their regulatory. A lot of them have attained maturity level 3, ML3 status, the latest being the South African Regulatory Authority. So it's all this ecosystem that can only help us as a continent, and we need partnerships from you to make sure that Africa ends up being sustainable in pandemic readiness and vaccine manufacturing capability. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panelists for those great presentations. And I'm going to begin now with a series of questions. And it'd be great if you could answer the question, but if something else comes to mind that you'd really like to talk about, feel free to bring it up. So the first question goes to Janine. As a major pharmaceutical company that develops and supplies both COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, what are the lessons Pfizer has learned from the pandemic, and what advice can you give to governments in each country?
Thank you very much for allowing me to offer that advice today. That's wonderful. Thank you. I think actually throughout all of our presentations, even earlier today and now, I think there's lots of lessons that we've all learned in the public and private sector and across industries as well. And I think the one key theme that has come through from everyone is this spirit of collaboration. Collaboration between the public and private sector, and not only that, collaboration amongst companies as well. And that leads me probably as well to another point, which is really important in terms of the collaboration between companies, and that's really the maintenance of a robust IP protection, because that was really foundational to our capacity to be able to react quickly and effectively in terms of this pandemic, and actually allowed us to collaborate with BioNTech in the first place. So that for me are really, really important points. Now, in addition to that, and again, we've heard through some of the panelists as well, the importance of surveillance and monitoring systems, but that also requires investment. So you have to invest in order to be able to make sure that you can invest in prevention, invest in surveillance, invest in the monitoring systems as well. And the other aspect is, as well, that I'd like us to consider moving forward is that we all need to continue to be vigilant. This is not over. And so therefore, to ensure that we are getting prepared and we are getting ready, that's why we need to make sure we do put in place opportunities, probably an international approach actually, to be able to share pathogens, to be able to make sure that we do have a quick and predictable sharing of pathogens and other aspects of things. Strengthening healthcare systems is absolutely critical, because this is we saw it's a huge burden brought to every healthcare system, and then as a result, some things were put to one side. You know, maybe cancer treatments, operations, those type of things are actually put to one side. So is there a way that healthcare systems and governments can work together to make sure that we can deal with the pandemic, but also make sure that we're able to, you know, continue with more routine aspects of things? I loved what regulatory authorities did. They maintained incredible flexibilities in terms of rolling reviews and what we did in order to be able to speed things moving forward. And my hope is that that can continue even beyond emergency situations as well. And in addition to that, my last point before anybody else would like to join is, I think, your point about the fact about vaccines are only effective if they are in arms and they become vaccinations. So we must continue to do everything that we can to increase vaccine confidence, you know, really help with vaccine hesitancy, and not just vaccines as well, also treatment confidence and treatment hesitancy. So those are the sort of things that I have seen over the last few years that would be helpful in terms of us moving forward.
Thank you for that great answer. So can I move on to Patrick? So Patrick, feel free to answer that question as well, because it looks like you have something to say. But my question to you is, you know, Moderna was a small biotech, but it's not small anymore. Is there a limitation that you see to the RNA technology? For instance, can it replace the conjugate vaccines in children? You know, or can it be put on a patch? Are there things that you see that could be technical problems for what looks like an unlimited future for RNA vaccines?
So Jerome, thank you for the question, and also just once again, thank you so much for the organizers to invite Moderna and myself and the rest of the team to be present today. I'd like to address your question, but I'm going to take a slightly different angle, if I may. We've heard the theme of health security mentioned a number of times since the opening of the session. And, you know, health security, health insurance through vaccines. If we take that further, we're really talking about access. And when I think about access, I think about sort of like the 4 A's of access. And these are not necessarily in any order of importance, but there's the availability, there is the acceptability, there is the affordability, and as well the acceptability of the vaccine. And it's linked a little bit to what was said previously. If we think about availability, we do need the regulatory flexibility to make the vaccine available. And thanks to the regulators around the world, we saw incredible flexibility, be it rolling for, submissions, waivers, everything to make the vaccine available as quickly as possible. We can have all the manufacturing capacity, but without regulator support to make those vaccines rapidly available, that's the first A in my opinion. The second A would be the point about acceptability, and it's linked a little bit to the last point, which is vaccine confidence, vaccine hesitancy. I'm not talking about anti-vax, I'm talking about vaccine hesitancy, because I believe that legitimately around the world, people have questions, particularly when it comes to a new platform like mRNA. It's up to us from an industry perspective to provide reliable, trustworthy, credible information. Unfortunately, it's like Dr. TikTok and Dr. Facebook have become sort of like a predominant voice, which has undermined governments as well as healthcare professionals, as well as the industry's goal, which is to make vaccines available. You could argue to a certain extent some of the reason why Africa has been slow to embrace has also been as a result of lack of confidence in the vaccines. Affordability. Affordability is key, and I think that having principles that provide tiered pricing, I think the Gavi mechanism, the COVAX mechanism played a very, very important role in making sure that the vaccines were available at tiered pricing and affordable pricing. Another point, and it's linked to your question, another point concerning availability or acceptance of vaccines is how a vaccine is delivered or administered. You know, it's interesting, if you think about the fact that we vaccinate healthy populations, but we often send them into a channel for ill people, healthcare professionals, hospitals and clinics. And why is that? Because today the majority of vaccines are still administered through a needle and a syringe, 100-year-old technology, and we need nurses and healthcare professionals to administer the vaccine. Can you imagine if we had a microneedle patch and make it more convenient for somebody in the rural part of Africa somewhere to receive the vaccine through a drone at their doorstep, and they don't need a healthcare professional to also make it available? All the technology is there. So as we discuss access, as we discuss the challenges of manufacturing, I would say that we also need to look at availability, acceptability, affordability, and acceptance of vaccines, and that will take a village. It will take us a coalition to work for. And I think that we are missing some of that comprehensive dialogue around vaccines and arms, because at the end of the day, it is all about vaccines and arms. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. So next to Jae-young. So you've heard from companies that are in the US and in Europe and with different regulatory authorities. Do you think that there was a difference in what SK Bioscience had to do in Korea with regard to the challenges it was facing as it tried to move a new vaccine forward?
Yes, thank you very much, Aaron, for the questions. Your question is, regulatory difference between, like emerging country, like the US or EU and, Korea.
And then also potentially, the companies receive large funding from the US government in order to move it forward. And if you have any thoughts on a way to meet the 100-day challenge in Korea.
Okay, thank you very much for the broad question. During my presentation, I said that I was committed to produce the next pandemic vaccine within 100 days, just with the alignment with CEPI's 100 mission. Probably Pfizer and Moderna and the leading mRNA company is thinking about maybe within 50 days mission or something like that. But I think the point I'd like to emphasize on is we should be prepared. How can we make a vaccine within 100 days vaccine, 100 days? I think the most important key factor is preparedness. What kind of virus is going to be a possible next pandemic virus? maybe we have list. We can have a mock-up vaccine until the phase 1 and 2. And also we have to have the infrastructure in R&D and manufacturing. And also we have to have strategic regulatory pathway and also a clinical system. So after having pandemic outbreak, we can immediately switch on to react to develop and manufacture the pandemic. So I think the regulatory pathway in harmonization in around the world is one of the most important points. So I'd like to, again, emphasize on preparedness in whole value chain from development, clinical study, and then regulatory pathway, manufacturing, and distribution. So preparedness is everything in preparing next pandemic efficiently.
Thank you very much. So, Jan, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, because Merck had a very different approach in the pandemic. But you took 2 vaccines and 2 drugs, and you eventually ended up developing the drugs. So, but the other thing is that Merck has actually made drug donations globally before for a parasitic drug. How do you think that these differ? And do you think this is really a sustainable approach to the way Merck approaches products for global health?
Yeah, thanks, Jerome. When you talk about what we all do, what I've been amazed by each and every one of you that I've met, and all the colleagues here as well, is we are here to make a difference for patients. And if you look at MSD as a company, we've been successful for more than 100 years by focusing on that. What we've seen over and over again is that if we focus on the patients, we are incredibly successful as a company. Now, it's a very broad question. How do you make a difference for patients? And so we look at it in 2 ways. The first question is, how big of a difference do you make for patients? And the second is, to how many people are you able to offer that solution? The first question is a question of biopharmaceutical innovation. It's a question of discovery to address unmet medical needs. The second question is one about the broad availability that was spoken about by Patrick and others before. And what you there need to ask yourself is, 1, do we have the manufacturing capacity on our own, yes or no? Secondly, if you don't have it, who are you going to work with? And do they have the quality to produce? Because the last thing you want to do is you want to give something to patients who need it that wouldn't be good quality. In the pandemic, we've decided, before we even had registration, to sign voluntary license agreements for our small molecule, our antiviral, with many generic companies and a medicines patent pool. And the reason we were able to do that was because we knew that those companies had the quality of manufacturing for this technology. If you look at the newer technologies, there's still a lot of work to be done before you can go there. Finally, the financials. You made reference to our Mectizan donation program. Well, we've started donating in the 80s because there was no government in the world that had the financial means to pay for it. And we've been donating now for more than 40 years. I believe it's the largest program of its kind. We've never sold a single pill because there was no financial means for it. But as a company, just like each and every one of you in this room, what we do is to make a difference for patients, because that's what will make all of us successful all together in the long term.
Thank you. That was a great response. And now to Isao and Shionogi. So we've heard a lot about the vaccine 100-day challenge. Is it possible to do a drug 100-day challenge? And the cooperative approach that you were talking about, is that possible if you have to do a collaboration with Ildong? I mean, how do you do this, and can you do a 100-day challenge for a drug for a new novel pathogen?
Well, thank you for the question, and very challenging question. I think, you You know, we have Pfizer, we have Merck, we have Gilead, all antivirals, developing companies. In reality, 100 days without the very firm foundation of the database of preclinicals and CMCs, all those things, it's very difficult, I would say. The phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 with the significant number of patients involved in the antiviral compound is not that easy. However, even I think Merck and Pfizer both I think Gilead too have a very good compound panel like protease inhibitor, polymerase inhibitors, who have a very strong database scientifically to predict the good efficacy and safety in human. So we may be able to, again, working with the regulatory agency, how we could speed up the getting into the clinical studies. We may be able to shorten the timeline to get into human. And of course, if the compounds looks good, we may be able to run the phase 1, single dose, multiple dose, even the phase 2A type thing almost in parallel. However, the study like phase 3 requires to get even EUA type approval. So 100 days is I think it's a challenge, but our target, I think other 2 companies, 3 companies have done is almost 1 year from the phase 1 to launch of submitting the NDA. Is possible. Again, one more thing I would like to emphasize is the difficulties in creating the so-called non-pandemic stage. For example, we're the flu compound company. We didn't have any sales last 2 years because there are no flu in the world. To maintain the manufacturing, people, how we could keep selling the products, is very difficult for the acute phase infectious disease. So we need a help from the world, how we could maintain the readiness of the anti-infectious disease compound, particularly for the acute phase infectious disease. So I think this pandemic really opens up a lot of the future possibilities in changing the business model of the infectious disease area, which probably welcome more companies to join in the infectious disease. Again, the last 10 years, a lot of companies quit and leave from the infectious disease because of the difficulties I described.
Thank you. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it's an important contrast of the drug versus the vaccine. And actually Richard is not here, but they talk about during their 100-day challenge about creating viral libraries and identifying viral targets and then identifying classes of compounds that may work. May be one of those things that SCARTA or BARDA or whatever agency is helping to prepare for the next pandemic, may be able to forward fund companies in order to prepare things in advance. But that was a great question, and I'm sorry I threw you a curveball.
Thank you.
The next question is for Paul from Ildong. So the cooperation with Shionogi has been really a remarkable opportunity. And so now that you have a drug that may get emergency use approval, what about WHO pre-qualification? What about global health? What kind of volume are the 2 companies willing to move forward with in order to make this? I mean, because if we think about the vaccine gap, there's also a therapeutics gap around the world. And you saw what countries were trying to use, I mean, just about everything that they could in order to relieve the suffering. What do you think about the global health commitments that come with the ability to develop new technology like a drug?
Wow. That's a very good question. Actually, I think that question belongs to Mr. Tajiroki. But one thing for sure for Korean patients, I think the local production through tech transfer it's going to be really helpful for the Korean the patients, because we don't know what's going to happen next viral outbreak in Korea. But if Shionogi agree to Korea, our company to produce the drugs for the global health, then we're more than welcome to join to produce the drugs.
Thank you. Just to let you know that we don't only do this to the drug manufacturers, but we do this to vaccine manufacturers also. But it's a really, it's a very great answer, but it really highlights the problem that we think about vaccines for global health. We don't necessarily always think in the same way about the very critical therapeutics that countries need in order to take care of people. So the next question is for Mita. So it's very interesting how broadly Merck has to interface with the rest of the companies, both vaccine and other biomanufacturing companies, in order to ensure a global supply. So what is Merck's biggest challenge, or the biggest challenges, as you try to do that and anticipate the next pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Jerome. So actually, flashing back to, the pandemic, we had, I would say the number one challenge was for us supply security for our customers, since we are a critical supplier to enable these vaccines and therapeutics. And, it was such a constantly changing dynamic. We had pharmaceutical companies calling us, governments calling us, all of them to prioritize their vaccine, their therapeutic. So you had to keep figuring out who to serve. We had legal barriers, we had regulatory challenges because our customers wanted validation as soon as possible, but we had contracts with existing customers that we had to manage. And as I already mentioned, the most profound one was, how do you say I will supply to this COVID vaccine, but I will not supply to this life-saving therapeutic? For example, a cancer therapeutic, right? So supply security was and remains the number one challenge. And Janine, you kicked it off, and every esteemed speaker spoke about collaboration as being the key to success between us as a supplier to the manufacturers, to the governments, to the regulatory bodies. But maybe I can provide a bit of color to say, how do we solve this? So I'll give you two examples, right? During the pandemic, our pharmaceutical customers, because it was such a long lead time to supply product, started giving us lead times of 1 year to tell us what do we need. As the pandemic recedes, kind of the old habits come in, and we get lead times of 8 weeks. That lead time of 8 weeks, 9 weeks cannot enable for long-term planning. It's just not possible. So then the key is, what is the shared collaboration framework between us and our partners, right? That shared collaboration framework has to go through all the partners, and we all have to have the same metric of success. The other thing I'll say is that, of course, the government can play a critical role, because the government is the convener and actor in the crisis. And as the governments are preparing for the pandemic response, it's very important that they get us, the supplier, on the table to appreciate the supply chain complexity that's behind it, and also given the international nature of the pandemic, right? So those are two examples where I bring the collaboration to life. And if I go beyond the question, because you invited that, Jerome, one thought that struck me is that there's been so much discussion on manufacturing capacity, right? But not a lot of discussion on the supply chain that goes into that manufacturing capacity. So there are hundreds of components and raw materials and equipment that go into the manufacture of this vaccine and therapeutic. And I want to share a thought that while we talk about each nation being able to manufacture or have a manufacturing or a vaccine independence, actually no nation can own the whole supply chain. It's simply not possible, right? So that's why we said we'd push for kind of this open trade, free flow of goods, because you cannot have that entire complex supply chain in one country. So that's food for thought, that we need to have this collaboration and to let it flow, because nobody can do it by themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great reminder of the importance of global supply chains, and we'd forgotten all the problems we had getting different kinds of resources during the pandemic. So the next speaker, Petro. So the mRNA Technology Transfer Hub is an opportunity, but a challenge. Could you describe the need for improvements, such as whatever the practical difficulties that you face trying to achieve goals, and the blueprint for the hub moving forward to establish sustainable low and middle income country vaccine self-sufficiency for the next pandemic?
Thank you. Two questions in one. So maybe just to lead on the last comment from my colleague from Merck here, supply chain is a critical issue. Some of the challenges we face even today is access to GMP materials. The lead time to equipment is long. And I think we should be acutely aware that we're creating a global ecosystem if we want to be sustainable. And that indeed doesn't mean that one country should have it all. I think it's certainly partnerships. So challenges for us was indeed skills. South Africa does not have a vertically integrated vaccine manufacturing sector. We have full Finnish capability in 2 companies, but not vertically integrated. For us to have scaled up from 12 people to 100 people in 6 to 8 months, highly skilled jobs, was a huge challenge. The biggest challenge in this technology for us going from design of the vaccine to full GMP manufacturing is quality. Just the sheer amount of work that sits in all those quality assays is massive, but certainly there's teams and there's expertise to help that. The question around blueprint, this is an experiment. This is probably one of the biggest tech transfer programs in the history of vaccine, history of the vaccine industry, and it is an ambitious program. Will it provide a blueprint? I think it can. We have here combined partnership, which are private companies, biotech startups, a very young company, agile, fast-moving, decision-making, and very, very can-do attitude, with public entities, with multinational entities, with organizations such as CEPI, the World Health Organization, and others. The blueprint would be, how do we build these inclusive partnerships of public, private, and universities working together in a managed program, multifaceted, aiming at creating something which is sustainable. If we can get this to work with all the partnerships, we certainly provide a blueprint for other hub and spoke models to establish other platforms in low and middle income countries to contribute to vaccine manufacturing. What we're also producing here is a blueprint for vaccine innovation, combining universities in all of these countries and also the knowledge base, and work with private entities, with big pharma, to also do vaccine innovation, I think is an additional benefit that this platform would bring to vaccine manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, finally, Morena. So, you know, IVI and BioVac have had discussions on vaccine manufacturing in Africa that go back to before the pandemic. From a company level, what are the major difficulties that BioVac faces as you're trying to deal with the post-pandemic realities, and what do you think the mitigation is, and what can we or the world do to help?
Thanks, Jerome. I think the challenge started pre-pandemic in actual fact. I'm hoping that post-pandemic, the fact that we are having conversations and forum like this, I'm hoping that it will be better, but also with some slight skepticism. But let me start firstly pre-pandemic. African manufacturing pre-pandemic was not seen to be necessary. You know, when a company like us was started, you know, a lot of people, even up to about 2019, were saying, but what are you doing? There's so much supply, you can get cheaper vaccines out of India, you can get better technologies out of the US and Europe. What are you doing? You know, just shut shop and just, you know, do something else. But we had this vision of having end-to-end manufacture, and unfortunately it took, you know, the pandemic to make everybody realize that we actually need capacity in the likes of Africa. Going forward, I think, you know, coming directly to your question is that now that there's momentum, you know, the challenge is that this momentum can possibly be short-lived, because as we can see that there's, you know, our our own leaders globally are becoming a bit distracted with other global priorities. So I think that is a challenge in terms of just, the momentum slowing down. And again, we're all expected to be working at a pace that Europe, Asia, and others can work. And we must understand that we're building a biotechnology sector. We're also talking about vaccines, and we're talking about products. But in actual fact, we're talking about creating a sector. And a sector talks about, universities, talks about the supply chain, the vertical integration that Petra just mentioned. So I think going forward, whilst we're looking at the end product, which is important because ultimately we're all working for patients, I think we must understand that the capacity that we're building is an ecosystem that makes sure that there's skills, relevant skills, and that we do not lose the skills, to others. I always say that the challenge that we sit in South Africa is not, my staff going to Afrigen or going to other. The challenge is us losing skills to Europe or to the US, and so it's, so there are quite a lot of things that we need to make sure that in the next 5 to 10 years that we nurture and we make sure that we know that this is a marathon, and with a marathon you need to be prepared for what it comes, that it's not just a sprint. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great way to end this very interesting panel. And I'd like to thank the panelists, first for your insights and then for the discussion that you stimulated afterwards. I'm sure we'll continue with this discussion as the conference goes on. So once again, thank you very much, and I hope everyone will show them their appreciation and applause.
Thank you very much for that in-depth discussion, and I would like to extend our sincere gratitude once again to all the CEOs for their passionate discussion, and thank you, Dr. Jerome Kim, for leading the session. And ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of today's official events. And tomorrow, there will be an announcement of a Seoul Declaration conveying a key message of the 2022 World Bio Summit, and 3 plenary sessions and discussion sessions. So please maintain your interest throughout the sessions. Thank you very much for your participation, and we hope to meet all of you tomorrow as well. Thank you. Now we will have a